Okay.
So we are live now.
Yeah.
All right, so the room just opened up. Thank you guys for joining us right at the start. While we are sitting here and giving people another minute or two, for those of you who are with us, if you want to share in the comments, where you're coming from as well as what specialty you're applying into, it'll kind of help give us a little bit of a framework in thinking about that.
So where do we have people calling in? Who are joining in from?
We're just trying to craft about yourself and why you should be a person that residency program is looking at. So this is going to be related to personal statements as well as how you connect with the ERS and CVs. But then this is also going to be a piece where we talk about what happens when you have some of those blemishes on your record that you have to figure out, how do I have that conversation, as well as then thinking about growth mindset and imposter syndrome. Oops. All right, so I'll turn this over to Dr. Winters. I'll let you introduce yourself as well, because I think you're having connection issues at the start.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Tyree Winters. I'm actually a pediatrician by training. I'm a pediatric residency program director, as well as sit on the board for the Association of Pediatric Program Directors. So one of the things that we really wanted to highlight in terms of personal statements is really giving you an example of what a personal statement should look like, especially when we're determining for our specialties. With that being said, because of the fact that unfortunately I can't see you to be able to know if you got a chance to read through this personal statement or not, I'm going to just read it really quickly so you can just kind of get a chance to hear it, and then we'll talk about why this is or is not a good personal statement, especially for residency. So, becoming a physician is a goal aspired to by many. As a farmer's son, I've wakened early and returned home late from the fields. After long days with my father, I've been able to experience uncertainties, challenges, and plain old hard work similar to that faced by physicians. But like the doctors in the hospitals and Dr. Smith in his lab, I find happiness and satisfaction in helping people through medicine. Despite all the hardship doctors face, I want to help people every day. Practicing medicine is something with stress and long hours. It's worth stress and long hours. I finally understand my father. I know how he can wake up every morning, at 5 a.m. and drive his dirty green tractor until 7 p.m. So when you are seeing this personal statement, the first question that I want to ask everyone is, do you know what this person or what this farmer's son wants to go into for a specialty? And if your answer is, I have the slightest idea, your answer is the same as mine, especially as a program director. I should preference this by saying that on a given um, application cycle, so for each season that lasts between roughly September-ish to March for myself as a program director, I can tell you I will read through, and I'm not exaggerating, about over 2,000 personal statements. And with that being said, as I read through the first paragraph, the first thing I always think to myself is like, does this person even know what they want to be? And while this may be a strong personal statement for a to apply for medical school, this is not a strong personal statement to apply for a specific specialty. And so most people tend to grab their personal statement for medical school and try to rehash that for their residency applications. And we always say that's a no-no. So we're going to move to the next slide. And to be able to differentiate between medical school and residency, one of the biggest things that you want to think about with a personal statement is going back to that the old mindset that you had probably in English composition, which is, as I remember back from English AP many years ago, was answer the question. That's all I want to be able to know is like, can you answer the question of why you want to enter into this residency or into the specialty? So with that being said, the first and foremost thing you really want to think about is, are you expressing your desire to enter into the specific specialty? Are you also being able to highlight who you are, your personality, and your style? And the reason why I say that is because, especially when we're thinking about applications, I just told you that I will read through approximately about 2,000 applications and read through about 2,000 personal statements. And when I get to the point where I'm getting ready to invite someone to interview at my residency program, the first thing that I always tell everyone is that I've already got a chance to review and see your application and see that you're someone that I think is qualified to enter to this program. What I don't get a chance to see is who you are as a person. And that's why personal statements can be so influential. Oftentimes, a lot of people would describe an influential experience or individual that really inspired their career choice. And that's a great way of thinking about how to bring your personality into your personal statement, as well as being able to describe a little bit more than just why you wanted to enter into, say, for instance, me and Dr. Trevino's specialty of pediatrics. What specifically made you apply to our program? Now, when I say that, there is, for pediatrics, for instance, 211 different pediatric residency programs. ACGME requirements everywhere, and you will find that programs are very similar in terms of their mission and vision, but you can tailor your personal statement to really highlight the programs that you decided that I really want to focus in on, whether that's a program that may be a mid-size or a large program or a smaller program, or a program that is in a certain geographical location, or a program that may focus in on or have a track that's in global health, or a track that is in a more inner city, or a population that will focus in on health disparities. With that being said, that really can help to tailor your personal statement, so you're not writing individual personal statements, but you're really being able to highlight who you are and what stands out for you. There are some resources like LMSA, Careers in Medicine, University of Washington SOM, Career Advising Office, and then Brainstorming Worklist to really help to kind of think about some different ways that you can be able to work towards that personal statement. Next slide. A couple other pro tips that you want to think about is when you're thinking about specialty specific things. So especially when you're thinking about something like, let's just say OBGYN, or you are thinking about something like PM&R, really being able to highlight how some skill sets and clinical experiences that you were able to garner either during your medical school career or even previous to your medical school career can really be helpful. One of the things, especially for those who are entering into peds, when I see that someone, especially in, like, say for instance, after school program, that really is something that allows me to be able to understand, like, oh, they understand what it's like to work with kids, not only when the kids are just smiling and laughing and playing around, but when they're sick and when they are upset, when they can be very challenging to work with, you understand that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about those blemishes, how to be able to understand how you will benefit from the program, and also what you plan on bringing to the program. Remember, this is bi-directional, so it doesn't only shouldn't be a give or take type of deal. It should be we are trying to find a mutual benefit. And then also wanting to be able to highlight those meaningful and impactful experiences as well. And you have a section within the application, if you saw the previous, um, where we talk about the impactful experiences. Okay, next slide. All right. I do want to apologize in case if you are not being able to hear all of the things that I'm speaking about. Um, I will try to make sure my connection, unfortunately, it seems like it's just going in and out for a little bit right now. But just moving forward, pro tips and logistics, a couple of things like we talked about before. Avoid having general conversations, be specific about your specialty. Also, not reusing your medical school personal statement. Um, Finally, you also want to make sure, this is a big thing, have spell check and grammar check on when you're doing either a Word document or Pages, whatever you're going to use to be able to first draft your personal statement. Really use that. Really be intentional to look at every single word to make sure it's spelled correctly, to make sure even spell check may not catch those times where you may inadvertently have put a word that you're trying to say, so they sound the same, but they may be spelled differently. You want to definitely make sure you look at those things too. And then also ask others to review it. I always say the more eyes that you have, the better off you are. The other thing that I would say is a lot of times people don't think about this. Ask someone who is completely not in medicine to read your personal statement. The reason why I say that is that those individuals will have a better understanding of, or you have a better understanding of whether or not this is conveying the message that you want to get across, and someone doesn't have to use their own inflections or their own knowledge to be able to understand what you are trying to convey. It's a huge thing. I had both of my parents who are not in medicine read my personal statement, and they were very helpful with giving me great feedback. All right. And I think Dr. Trevino, you're next.
Yeah. Well, actually, we got a question that I think we'll address right now because I think it's a good flexion point before we look at these other examples. The question that came in was, how specific should we be in stating what we want from a residency program? And I think to share a little bit from my background with this, when I was applying to residency, I actually dual applied to pediatrics and emergency. So right off the bat, I had two separate personal statements. But even within pediatrics, I actually had two separate personal statements from that. One I had that was more of a research-focused statement that had a little more context behind what I had done and what I was hoping to do in pediatric residency. But then I had my other one that was not as research heavy, that based on what I could get from websites, from programs, or what I knew from talking to people, I kind of use those as my two directed pieces. And it's one of those things that you have to make sure that you keep, things organized for yourself, and definitely having other people read it is a big part of that, because the last thing I wanted was to have my pediatric personal statement talk about how much I want to do emergency medicine. And so it was helpful to keep those things clear when I was doing that. And then even though this isn't part of what we're talking about, but by having some of those differences, I did have some of my letter writers also do the same thing, where I had separate letters to be able to address that. And so I think it really just depends what you're really wanting to get out of that training. And so if you are wanting to, you recognize that you're applying to a broad set of programs, you may want to think about that. But I also would say, don't stress yourself too much in terms of thinking that you have to have individually crafted personal statements for every program, because that, I think, is going to really go too far into the kind of logistics and planning that you have to do for yourself.
No, I agree wholeheartedly, Dr. Trevino. Just for the sake of time, we can move forward.
Yeah.
All right. So these are two examples of real statements. One of the things that I want to show you is, as you get a chance just to kind of read through it, you will see one thing is you don't even have to necessarily go through and read the whole entire paragraph with knowing that this person wants to go into emergency medicine. Other things that I always say is that your first sentence really should be that thesis statement for you. Really should be able to set the tone of what's going to follow the rest of the way. So I always think about, when looking at this, when I think of my future role in medicine, I envision being a physician that will face a broad spectrum of clinical scenarios, including narrowing my focus only on one single specialty. When I look at that one, first thing that I think to myself is like, okay, so you really want to have something that's really focused, really narrowed. You don't want to go into something that's really more broad-based. Emergency medicine can, quote unquote, be in that narrowing focus, but really, when you think about it, does it really explain all in all what emergency medicine really means or details for you? First, if you go to the next personal statement, there is no better calling in life than helping your fellow human being when they are at their lowest. And so as I'm learning about this and thinking about it from in terms of emergency medicine, that really puts a more broader scope on this person and helps me to understand, like, okay, this is probably someone who will probably align with my mission and vision and goals for my residency program, where we talk a great deal about health disparities and being able to provide for those who are in need. And so those are things where it's like small little highlights, because let me be completely honest with you, most program directors are reading through at minimum 1,000 personal statements. I'm not sitting there and reading through the whole entire personal statement. I'm trying to really highlight. So I always say this is the time where you want to be very direct, very succinct, and very moving, because personal statements, there has been quite a few times where that personal statement has been the reason why I wanted to interview someone. And I've given somebody a chance to interview them. And I can't lie to you and tell you that there has been, again, a couple other times where that personal statement, that person did not match that personal statement. So we always want to be very direct, but also very reflective of who you are.
All right. So I think one important part to really think about as we talk about the personal statements is this understanding that there's maybe something that goes into your story that you really have to figure out, how do I address this? You have to have this recognition first off that no applicant is perfect. So there's going to be something there. The question becomes, with those things, that the blemishes that exist, are they larger red flags that you need to address? Is it something that you can kind of work around a little bit? And so a lot of that is going to become come evident when you're having your conversations with your mentors about what sort of things you may be looking at. So, for instance, these blemishes can include some academic challenges that may have been there, such as failing a block or needing to repeat a rotation, failing boards, any sort of academic challenges that were there from your school, including if it got to that point of having a dismissal or transfer. And this may also include leaves of absence. Excuse me. So you do have to think about these pieces because they're going to be things that a program director or application reviewer is going to see and then start to have questions about what's going on here. Now, one of the big things that does go with this, like Dr. Winters had been talking about, is that you want to be able to be a little more proactive about some of these blemishes, though, so that you're able to control that narrative that exists with that. And so, for instance, in my case, pediatric emergency medicine fellowship has been very competitive over the years. And I didn't match the first time that I applied. So that was going to be something that I had to figure out how to address. It wasn't something I wanted to have be the full focus of my personal statement, but it was something that I had to be honest and share about and recognize that that was going to be something that comes up in interviews. So I had to be prepared for how I wanted to craft that narrative of what happened, what I learned from it, and how do I move forward with that for what I was looking for in training. And so that second point about how you learn from the experience to avoid them in the future is a big part of how you discuss these blemishes. Now, recognizing that in a personal statement, you don't have a lot of space, so you may not always be able to give the full context that you would like to. So you do have to figure out, how do I mention and recognize that this is a part of the narrative that's here and part of the journey that you've taken, but also not have it be the only thing that they take away from your application. Now, along with this, though, this may include talking about the resources that you need to be successful. So, for instance, the insight you can have is that if test taking has been an issue, recognizing that, hey, I should probably put in my personal statement that I want to look into what sort of academic resources are there. I'm curious about test taking analysis and the approach that the program takes to board preparation, and be mindful that that is something that you're learning from your past that's going to influence the types of programs that you are looking at and what sort of support may be there. And so being able to be honest about that and upfront about that is actually an important thing, and I think shows maturity and growth to programs then when they're looking through this and saying, hey, this person isn't trying to hide this away. They really are trying to be transparent about this challenge that they've had, but they've also had that mindset and that insight into, I need to do something different. So to that point, and you heard Dr. Winters talked about this earlier, giving context, not excuses. And so these, I think, 4 points that can be really helpful then for having the context for yourself about how to talk about this. Now, like I said, you may not be able to have this really all laid out in your personal statement, but I think these 4 points really give you a way to address it in the interview. And so you really are trying to think about the narrative that you're crafting through all of these aspects of your application. And while we're not talking about the interview directly, that's part of this as well. So you want to be able to tell the story and take the accountability for what happened. You want to think about what you could have done differently, what you learned about the situation, and how are you better because of what happened. And so I really just want to highlight this point again, though, that top line, that not addressing these things allows others to create their own version of the events. And when you don't have that aspect of the narrative, it can be really challenging to overcome that part then in terms of what they're seeing. So as we think about all of this, this was our kind of our pieces talking about personal statements, but now we're going to go into a little bit more about the CV aspect that is going to kind of highlight some of the stuff from ERAS that you guys heard about the day before, but also how to think about this in the long term for your careers.
Perfect. So a CV versus a resume, I think this is something that a lot of people may have difficult time being able to gather, especially when you are leaving from that space of going from medical school and going from undergraduate to now entering into graduate medical education and forevermore your career. A CV is very specific and tailored towards your specialty, towards your academic work. When you are thinking about, especially for ERAS, and you are applying in, you're basically being able to create an online CV at that particular point in time. So CVs are going to highlight your academic accomplishments, publications, any posters or presentations, podcast, or other social media presence, including things that may have been online materials that you contributed to, which we see a lot more of nowadays. When you are thinking about how to prepare for ERAS and you're trying to get together with for CV, there's a couple of things that I recommend. The first thing is for your medical school, they typically have a templated or a format that they have for their faculty for CV. You can actually find that typically online. And so what I would suggest is that you look and see how your school formats their CV. You can literally go onto the faculty pages and being able to pull up most faculty CVs and see how they outline theirs, just to give you an example of what does that look like. When you are putting together information, you definitely want to make sure that you're thinking about when you have did a publication or you did a presentation, what was the organization for, or what was the location, the position, the descriptions, all these wonderful things you want to put together. You also want to highlight your research work and volunteer experience, and you also want to make sure that it is relevant. So, case in point, if you worked at Dairy Queen when you were 15 years old, that's something that you are not going to necessarily put on your CV. We always usually talk about your last previous experience in terms of stage of your medical career, is how far you want to go back. So if you are applying now for residency, the farthest you really want to go back is medical school, plus or minus if you did something like a really substantial research in like maybe your senior year of undergraduate, or you did an undergraduate thesis, or you did a master's program, you can add those things in, but you really don't want to go back into like your freshman year of college, because there's more than one stage back behind. Next. The things that CVs do really well is it really tells your story of what you've been able to achieve, and it highlights and emphasizes why you may be the best fit for this desired position. So again, as I was talking about before, with that experience of being say for instance, you were a after school counselor in college, you may not necessarily want to put that down on your CV, especially if it was like when you were 18, but it can also highlight why your experience as well for being a pediatrician going forward. You also want to make sure that you're discussing and describing transferable skills by using those strong verbs, something that you remember from those, from probably your resume building courses or any workshops that you have done. And like I talked about before, you want to delete the majority of your college work because it's going farther behind than that one stage behind your current experience. This is the typical general CV template. I always say it's very important when you are building your CV, and this is a pro tip, which is once you want to look at what your medical school has and set the format for what your medical school does. And then once you start residency, look and see what your institution CV template is and reformat it. Why I say that's super important is because it will allow you to be able to start to keep editing. Your CV is a live document. You are always going to edit it. I can tell you right now, Dr. Trevino has saw my CV before. I think my CV currently right now is about 10 pages and it's still growing with all of the work that I've done, whether it's been my research or my leadership skills or whatever have you. And so because of that, I typically set aside, and I'm very fortunate enough for my or my administrator helps me to set aside a time. She puts it in my calendar, like, Dr. Warners, make sure you update your CV every 3 months because I do so much work like this. And so why I say that's super important is because as you're starting to do this, you will start to notice, like, you've given talks, you've talked on talk maybe to your school or somewhere else, and you'll put that in your CV, and it just continues to help you to kind of get in that practice. But it also allows for you to prepare for moving forward. This is just one little small bump in a long, or one small step in a long, long road ahead in your academic work. As you go down, the other thing that I would tell you is that as you see, and obviously this is self-explanatory, you can read the descriptions, but just wanted to give you kind of like some highlights. One of the things that you really want to kind of focus in on or think about is where things should go. Sometimes you may find that something like a publication, if it's an online web-based publication, you may think to yourself, like, does it go under journal articles? Does it go under media contribution? Where does this go under? And so that's a point in time where you definitely don't want to duplicate, but you want to be intentional about figuring out whether those things go. Keep this up. Things with certifications are huge. I tell all of my medical students, I make them do a course in health literacy through the CDC, and you get a certificate afterwards. A lot of times they don't put that on their CV, and I'm like, that's the same way as if you did a course in like medical Spanish, or if you did your BLS or your PAL certification or ACLS certification. You'll put that in there. Those are things that will highlight and show the work that you've been doing. So please make sure you do that. Certain things that are in red, you may or may not have right now, and that's okay. You just want to create a tab and a space for it, so then you don't forget to add those things as you move forward. Next slide. So for logistics, always consider having multiple versions of your CV. I know I do, and know that Dr. Trevino does as well, especially because Dr. Trevino, with his work that he's done with his PhD and then beyond with his work with his MD, sometimes those things may or may not add up. Also, I have different versions, especially when it comes time for me to have an academic appointment. So with my professorships, that's one. And then other times when it's looking for specific roles, whether it's a clinical role or so, that's another one that I may have. LinkedIn is something that when you have your profile on LinkedIn, it can help you, and you can actually have something that's set up a little bit similar, but it also allows for you to be able to make sure that you're following along and editing all of those different places. Make sure that it's reviewed by a mentor or a friend who has experience as well to be able to give constructive feedback. Make sure you proofread it. It should be single space. It's not like your resume where you have all of these different lofty like fonts and all different type of things. You just want to make sure that you're keeping it very simple, plain, to the point. Stick to the facts, as I remember being told. You can italicize and bold for emphasis. So say, for instance, if you are an author on a publication, and you may not be first author, but you may be third author, you may be the last author, you want to bold your name so that way it's easy for a reviewer of your CV to know exactly where was your contribution. And then also LMSA do have curriculum vitae templates as well, but I can't highlight enough. Look at your school's template, use your school's template. When you get into residency, use your residency template. Keep that up. It will serve you so well. Me and Dr. Trevino was just having a conversation about this, because as I go up for promotion for the next part of my professorship, it's so helpful.
Yeah, and it may seem weird because what you're really looking for from your residency program is what the faculty CV template may look like for promotions. But it's okay to start using that because you want to get comfortable with those formats. And so, hey, Dr. Winters, before we go on to our next sections, there's a couple of questions that I think work really well for us to address. Um,
Sure.
so, one, I kind of started mentioning in the chat about how to make this transition from a special, in your personal statement, from talking about why I want the specialty to how do I bring in the blemishes. And so, first, I want to share a little bit how I did that in mine. I was very upfront with mine. Because this was such a core part of my personal statement, I actually started off with that being in the first paragraph. So the setup that I used was my first paragraph was about why I wanted to do pediatric emergency medicine. The second paragraph was to highlight my kind of the key attributes from my CV that I wanted a program to know about. And then the third paragraph was kind of the things that I wanted out of a training program. And so in that first paragraph, I mentioned that this was a struggle that I had, but I also connected it to a clinical situation that brought together why this was such an important thing for me. And so I had mentioned in the chat that maybe you don't always have it as a first piece, but especially when we were talking about giving context to what you want to learn from it or what you learn from it or what things you need, there are other points in the CV or in the personal statement, where you might be able to tie in the blemishes. But Dr. Winters, the question I wanted to share with you on this was someone asked about using the extenuating circumstances section to elaborate and how you can kind of use the different parts of the ERS application to pull all of this together, and wanted to get your take as a program director.
Yeah, I think that is completely fine. Here's the bottom line that you want to know for us as program directors are, and trust me when I tell you, like I said before, I sit on the board for all of the program directors, including fellowship program directors for pediatrics. Our biggest thing is that we just want you to answer the question. Just help us to know. So there is not a specific place where you have to put this and it will highlight it the best. My thought process is this: if someone has some extenuating circumstance that they really want me to know, that is going to be imperative for me to say, okay, I need to give this person a second look or a shot or consider them in a holistic standpoint, I normally will have a quick look and see if they had listed under whether it was meaningful experiences, which is the section that usually most people put down um, for the extenuating circumstance, or I will look at their personal statement really quick and see that they elaborate on what could have been the possibility. So, say for instance, there was somebody who clearly had a leave of absence within their training, and the leave of absence was typically longer than about a month or a 3-month period. Then I normally see like what happened, or if someone had maybe had to repeat or remediate a course or remediate or retake their board exam. Typically when that happens, the first thing that I think about is it's like, okay, was something going on? Did they realize? And it doesn't have to be anything like so over dramatic. It could just be like, look, I realized when the study habits that I was using in undergraduate and in high school just did not work when I got to medical school, and I had to change up what I had to do. That's okay. I think a lot of people, and it's funny because when you are sitting in these spaces now, I've got a chance to sit on both sides of this kind of scenario, and I know what it's like for being a candidate and saying like, "What do these people want? They're judging me," and da 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 da. And I'm thinking to myself like, "It's me."
Yeah.
It's literally me who's the man, the person in the back room. It's me, and I can tell you what I'm thinking. I'm thinking to myself like, this kid probably had like something that happened, and I need to figure out what's going on, because I can tell you, I've had some of the best residents, people that I have made my chief residents, who may have failed their boards. Um, I did not always do well on standardized tests, especially the in-service training exam, which is, I still get I get a twitch every time I think about it to say, but I passed my boards. But still, it's those things where we understand. Just tell us.
But I think to that point, this is a good reason why we talk about the blemishes in this, that you don't know how that other person on the other side is really going to take that. And so if you don't have those there, you don't know that you're going to have someone like a Dr. Winters as the program director who is able to kind of read through that or connect to some of the challenges that he had to say, oh, wait, there's something else here that I want to dig into. Because of the volume of applications that people are getting, some program directors really don't have that ability to, and it may be something that, something else that they see that connects, which is fine. But that's why, as we talk about this, it's really the whole narrative of your entire application. And, there were some questions that I had answered in the chat about that, of, certifications that people have had, or another pieces that kind of tie in. But the reality is, what is the story that you want someone to take away from? Because instead of thinking about these as each individual parts, this is the ERS application, here are the individual questions, here's my personal statement, here's the CV part. You really need to think of it as one packet, because that's ultimately what we're all getting. When we review these, it's a PDF of all of this stuff, and your letters of recs included. So how that plays into it is all one story that we see about you as an applicant. Another good question I think we should address now while we're talking about personal statements, though, it's a little different direction, but someone asked, should we send personal statements to programs we signal? And also, is it recommended to make it known to your program that they're your first choice? And I think this is definitely a good one for you, given your experience, not just as a program director, but as a program director leader on the national scale, of what are people talking about this?
Yeah, so here's a couple of things I would tell you. Unless you have a specific reason of why you want to have an individual personal statement. So it's like, I'm really extremely interested in, so I have a medical education track. I'm extremely really interested in your medical education track, and here's the reasons why, blah, 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 blah. Then really you putting down that you really want to come to my program is not going to make me go like, ooh, I got to have this person. I got to interview this person at all. It's nice, but it's not going to really tip the scales very much. So don't waste your time. What I will say is that in regards of letting it be known that you are that you're extremely interested in our program, that's great. We love the fact of knowing that you're extremely interested in our program. That's the reason why we do have signals. We also understand too that there's 5 signals that you get. Again, there's 211 programs, pediatric programs, so you can't signal everyone that you may really want to go to. The advice that we always give is the following, which is, one, on our end, remember this is bidirectional, a signal should only be able to guide me on who I invite to interview, and that's it. That's where the signals leave. I don't think about the signals anymore. It's recommended from every organization not to think about signals anymore, because once you actually do go through the process of interviewing with us, your opinion of us may change. You may not want to have us be your signal anymore. Who knows? And so that's the reason why we want to make sure that we are allowing for you as the candidate to really have that power, that say so. But if it's your home institution, don't waste your signal on that home institution. It should be known. For my individuals who do not have a home institution, i.e. individuals who went to osteopathic medical school or have gone to international medical graduate, international medical schools, and you may or may not have a home program, yes, it definitely does put you at it puts a slight disadvantage, because you lose kind of that signal of something that you're interested in. But again, I would not, unless you have a very specific reason just throw our name in your personal statement, because again, it's not going to move the needle that much, and it's just going to take up more of your time. If you have that time, then by all means, it doesn't hurt. But if you don't have that time, which I'm assuming that you don't, um, yeah, I wouldn't waste it.
All right, so we are going to close up with, I think, two other pieces that go into all of this. I'll talk about growth mindset, and Dr. Winters will talk about imposter syndrome. We will still have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. So if you do have them, keep them coming in, and we'll be able to answer them. Some of them we may be able to do live. Some of them we may just answer in the chat. But talking about growth mindset, I think this is something that we're seeing a lot more as a topic that's discussed in medical education. Definitely more than when myself and Dr. Winters were in medical school and residency training. And I think the reason that we're seeing this more is because we're also recognizing that, for instance, burnout is a big part of what exists in our medical societies and our medical professions. And so the idea of growth mindset, I think, really fits well into this, because it's really trying to help shape how you look at the world, how you look at challenges that may arise, and how you respond to them. And so the resilience piece, I think, is another part that ties really deeply with a growth mindset. So really, in thinking about this divide between growth or fixed, on the growth side, you're really trying to think about the challenges that may exist, but then also acknowledge and embrace the weaknesses and struggles that you've had, and recognize that there's things that you can actually move past. So this is a dynamic mindset. It's not something that is stuck in stone that, hey, I can't do this and I'm never going to be able to do this. It may just be that it's something that you need a different approach to. So for instance, if test taking is a challenge that you have, like Dr. Winters was saying, how you studied in high school is not what's going to help you when you're taking your ITEs for in training or when you're preparing for the board. So you may have to change that and be open to change that exists. And so something that may not have worked for you before may be something that does work for you now. So really, truly thinking about this as brain training and your brain as a muscle is an important part of the growth mindset. So some of the things that you may say to yourself is, I don't understand this yet, or maybe I need to use a different approach to it. And I think this is one of the things that I think has been challenging for a lot of people in medicine, that when we get to these challenges that we face along kind of our journey, sometimes we don't know how to ask for help, and we don't know how to look for direction to go through this. There's a lot of maybe negative speak that sits there with us. And it's something that I think we all have to kind of figure out how we work through that for ourselves. I mean, as funny as it is to bring it up, you think about like Snoop Dogg and making the affirmations videos that he did for his grandkids kind of comes into this. And it's those sayings that are simple enough that we think about when we're 5 and 6 years old, about how you get up from having a scraped knee. But it's kind of sometimes the same things that go into how we respond to challenges that are with us in our professional life as we get older, or personal life even, and thinking about how you work around those pieces. And so being able to talk about that openly, and being able to find ways to have those conversations with your peers, with mentors, I think is an important part of the growth that's going to come as you go through training, and really needs to be there to help you sustain, I think, a positive working relationship for yourself with your career.
Just to add to that real quick before we go into imposter syndrome, one of the things I would tell you is that being physicians, or being soon to be physicians, I can tell you, regardless of not whatever you think, you have probably a type A personality. You are always the smartest kid in the room, or you are the one who typically knew the answers and one who first raised your hand. And that first moment when you realize, like, oh my God, I don't get something, or I don't know it, it is this ultimate shock, like, oh my God, I'm not perfect. And I know you're like, I don't think I'm perfect, and everybody thinks that, and blah, 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 but I can tell you it gets real. And you have to be able to learn how to be able to say, it's okay that I don't know something, or that I need to learn it. Just please keep that in mind. I share that with my medical students, my residents all the time. A good friend of ours by the name of Dr. Lot, I'll never forget the first time I got constructive feedback back with my in residency, and he just looked at me. He was like, "Oh my God, you didn't realize you weren't perfect." And I was like, "I hate you," but it's so true, and I had to change my mindset. But in terms of imposter syndrome, this is something that, um, and even changing the term of imposter syndrome, which there has been so much literature talking about, we should even stop calling it imposter syndrome, really, because of the fact of what that implies is that we are imposters, but we're not. However, I can't lie to you and say that none of us have not felt, or that we've all have felt this way in terms of that our success was not deserved or that we were frauds. It's very difficult, and especially as you move forward. And one of the things that moving forward, even into my own career and being in situations and moving forward where in the next couple of months I will be in have a promotion where I will be a administrator within our hospital system, and having that thought to myself was like, oh my God, I got through with a smile and being nice to people. That's how I got through. I don't know anything really. Um, this is something that really is sets us up for failure, especially when we are thinking about our CVs, when we're thinking about our personal statements, and we're thinking about what should we put down and what should we not put down. It's super, super important to remember, first and foremost, that things such as having learning disabilities, having difficulty sometimes being able just to understand things that it seems like everybody else understands so quickly, that does not make us less worthy of being able to be in these positions. Dr. Trevino hit the nail on the head when he said, what happens if you don't have a Dr. Winters as a program director that's looking at this holistic approach? And that reminds me day in and day out why I'm so thankful to be able to be in spaces like this where I can make decisions for people who look like me, who have had experiences like me, because we need this. This is part of thinking about, are you truly being an imposter? Are you truly representing who you are? Because our patients need to see us in these lights. So not hesitating to do the things that are listed, like such as answering questions, asking questions, being able to remember that you may need to change things up for your study habits to improve. That does not make you less than. Next slide. Um, Two things with dealing with an imposter syndrome or dealing with the mindset that you are less than, which is first and foremost understanding what it is to behave like an imposter, and recognizing that you are not an imposter. You are exactly where you're supposed to be at the given time. But then also practicing being comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's so hard to say, but I can't lie to you and tell you that you are not, especially within this space. One of the things that I constantly teach my learners is I put them in situations where I literally our during our clinical teaching, I always put them in situations where I know that they're going to be uncomfortable. And I do that on purpose because I'm like, the final exam is not a board exam. It's not a whether or not you can take this test. The final exam is when you have that patient in front of you who are saying, Doctor, please help me. That's going to be your final exam. And it's going to be such an uncomfortable position. However, you have to learn how to be able to start to become comfortable. And this is why we go through this long, tedious process. Um, so to be able to help to get you to that point, make sure that you remember asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. Being able to apply every opportunity um, and apply for every opportunity when you're eligible for it. Ask for accommodations if needed. It's okay not to be perfect, seriously. But the last thing we want to leave you with is to remember that you have to believe in yourself. You have to go back and make sure you're thinking about the growth mindset, thinking about like, how do I grow from this experience, and not that this is my exit, my end all be all. I think that's the huge thing that we want to get across from you, whether it's looking at your CV, whether it's looking at your personal statement, whether it's looking at your applications. How do I grow from this? Even if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, like, I don't have all the the research experience. I don't have all these extracurricular activities experiences. Just understanding that that's okay. That's where you're starting at, but that's not where you're ending, and you can move forward from it. Dr. Trevino, you want to take us out?
Yeah. So to close it out, take a screenshot picture of this slide so that you know this is for the specialty panels that are occurring next week. You'll see the dates there. A lot of these are, going to be directed by people within those specialties. So while, like I said, these first couple of ones were very much general application type pieces to consider, this will be specialty specific. Also, there are going to be a couple of other special focus panels that will take place for as applying as an IMG, applying as your authentic self. So really trying to bring together a lot of the pieces that we've talked about between ERAS, between personal statements, CVs, and then being a financially savvy resident. And then lastly, I want to call your attention as well to a scholarship opportunity from the Tour for Diversity for the application process. There's one last question in here about having opportunities to ask questions about personal statements, CVs before applications open. I would definitely say feel free to reach out to any of us, myself or Dr. Winters, as well as the Tour for Diversity on X or Instagram. We have people who are kind of there and able to answer questions that are, that come up from all of the workshops actually. So we definitely find ways to continue to engage. That I think is one of the big pieces that we learned kind of in the, from COVID and the pivots that we made as an organization, that these conversations really go beyond just the single webinar of us sitting here talking about these things. So thank you for thinking this was a really great workshop, but definitely feel free to continue the conversation with us through everything else. And last question for LMSA members do not have membership numbers. That is a great question about the scholarship app, about what to input in that section. I will have to see if we can get more clarification on that from some of the people from our team who kind of are looking at that part.
There should be an email on application to be able to, for any questions that you can.
Yeah,
I do believe.
So, well, thank you guys for being great with us. You guys shared a lot of really awesome questions about this and some good things to think about too in terms of how to bring all of this together. And so we hope to continue the conversation and then really see you guys next week for the subspecialty panels that go on. And best of luck with all of this in terms of putting together the application and navigating this process. It really is an exciting time.
Thank you so much, y'all, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hopefully it's helpful.